Imagine a world thousands of years ago. A world where the night sky was not drowned by artificial light, where every star felt closer, heavier, almost watching. A land filled with kings, wars, shifting alliances, and whispered prophecies. A time when power was not only measured by armies, but by belief. A time when messages were not sent through devices, but believed to come from something far greater, something unseen, yet deeply felt. In this world, one name appears again and again, woven into ancient narratives passed down through generations, spoken in reverence, curiosity, and sometimes mystery. Elisha. Some describe him as a prophet, some as a spiritual guide, others as a man surrounded by events so unusual they seem to exist somewhere between history and legend. But the question still lingers: who was Elisha, really? And why, after so many centuries, does his story still echo? To understand him, you have to step into the world he lived in. This was a time of tension. Kingdoms rose and fell quickly, borders shifted, leaders sought power and feared losing it. But alongside political struggles, there was something deeper, a powerful connection between people and faith. Communities didn't just look to kings for direction, they looked to spiritual figures, individuals believed to carry insight beyond ordinary understanding. And within that landscape, Elisha's story begins, not in power, but in simplicity. According to ancient accounts, Elisha was not born into influence. He wasn't raised in a palace, nor trained from childhood as a leader. Instead, he is described as living a quiet life, working in the fields, far removed from authority or recognition. There's something important about that detail, because it suggests that his story didn't begin with greatness. It began with the ordinary. Then comes the moment that changes everything. A figure enters the story, Elijah. A name already known, a presence already established. Elijah is described as a powerful prophet, a man associated with bold actions and dramatic events. And one day, he approaches Elisha. No grand announcement, no long speech, just a symbolic act. A mantle, a cloak, is placed upon Elisha. In that single moment, something shifts. Not visibly, not loudly, but deeply. Because in the traditions that tell this story, that gesture meant responsibility, purpose, a calling. And Elisha understands. But what happens next is just as important as the moment itself.
He doesn't immediately rush into his new role. He doesn't chase recognition or power. Instead, he goes back to his home, back to his past. He says goodbye to the life he knew. And in some accounts, he makes a symbolic break, a decision that marks the end of one identity and the beginning of another. This transition is not rushed, it's deliberate, because stepping into something greater often requires letting go of what came before. From that point on, Elisha follows Elijah, not as an equal, not yet, but as a student, an observer, a companion. And this period is crucial, because it's here that transformation happens quietly. There are no dramatic declarations, no instant rise to power. Instead, there is time. Time spent learning, watching, understanding, traveling through different regions, encountering different people, witnessing different situations. It's a process that shapes him, not just as a figure of belief, but as a human being navigating complexity. And then, comes one of the most dramatic turning points in the story: the departure of Elijah. In the ancient accounts, this moment is described with powerful imagery: fire, wind, movement that feels almost otherworldly. It's not described like an ordinary ending. It's sudden, intense, unforgettable. And then, Elijah is gone. What remains is silence. And Elisha.
This is the moment where everything changes again. Because now there is no one to follow, no one to learn from, no one to stand behind. Now he must stand on his own, and this is where his story truly begins. After this moment, Elisha emerges as a recognized figure. Not a king, not a ruler, but something different, a presence. People begin to seek him out, not for commands, but for guidance, not for control, but for understanding. And in the stories that follow, his role becomes clearer. He is described as someone people turn to in times of uncertainty, when resources are scarce, when illness strikes, when decisions feel impossible. And this is where the accounts become more complex, because many of the traditions surrounding Elisha include events that seem extraordinary. Water sources becoming purified, food appearing sufficient during scarcity, healing taking place where there was once suffering, moments where nature itself seems to respond, even stories where life is restored in unexpected ways. But these accounts are not universally interpreted the same way. Some see them as literal events, others as symbolic narratives, ways of expressing deeper truths. And some view them through a historical lens, asking questions about context, interpretation, and meaning. What matters is not just whether these events happened exactly as described, but what they represent. Because beyond the extraordinary elements, there is a consistent theme: connection. Elisha is not portrayed as distant. He is not separated from people. Instead, he is deeply involved in their lives. He listens, he responds, he engages. Whether interacting with individuals facing personal struggles or leaders dealing with political challenges, his role remains the same: not to dominate, but to guide. And that creates a unique position. He stands between two worlds, the world of belief and the world of reality, the spiritual and the practical. In some accounts, he is seen advising kings, offering warnings, providing insight, but he never becomes a ruler himself. He remains separate from power, and that separation may be part of what gives his voice weight, because he is not driven by authority, he is driven by purpose. As time passes, his presence becomes part of the larger narrative of the region, not always in the spotlight, but always present. And eventually, like all human lives, his story reaches its end. He is described as passing away after years of influence. A life that began in obscurity ends with recognition. But even here, the story doesn't fully close, because one of the most striking traditions comes after his death, an event that continues to spark curiosity. According to the account, a deceased man is placed in the same burial place, and upon contact with Elisha's remains, life is restored. It's a story that raises questions about belief, about symbolism, about interpretation.
Some see it as a reflection of enduring influence, that even in death, his presence carried meaning. Others see it as a narrative designed to emphasize the impact of a life dedicated to something greater. And some simply wonder. But regardless of how it is understood, the story remains. And that might be the most important part. Because Elisha's story is not just about events, it's about themes, transformation from ordinary to extraordinary, leadership without seeking control, faith in something beyond immediate understanding, and connection between individuals, communities, and belief. It's a story that continues to exist not because every detail is universally agreed upon, but because it speaks to something deeper: the human search for meaning, the desire to understand purpose, the curiosity about what lies beyond the visible world. And maybe that's why his name still appears today, not just in religious discussions, but in conversations about history, identity, and belief. Because stories like this don't belong only to the past. They live on in questions, in interpretations, in the way people continue to seek answers, even now. And perhaps the real question is not just who Elisha was, but why his story still matters. Because in a world that has changed so much, where technology has replaced silence and information travels instantly, the deeper questions remain the same. Who guides us? What gives life meaning? And what, if anything, exists beyond what we can see? Elisha's story doesn't answer these questions directly, but it invites them. And sometimes the invitation to question is more powerful than the answer itself.